Hey everyone, Andang here for some special Lord of the Rings online goodness. Today we are going to be interviewing LOTRO's producer Raninia. It should be a lot of fun. We're going to be talking about the legendary items update. We're going to be talking about monetization. We're going to be talking about the new expansion. Should be really, really fun. So, without further ado, welcome Raninia.
Hello. Nice to see you. Nice to meet you. Excited to do this. What do you got for me?
Right to the point. All right, let's go.
Let's do it.
First, thanks for joining today. I personally know several players who have returned just because of your previous interviews. And
Wow.
I'd just like
That's
to
a lot
thank
of
you.
pressure to put on me. Jeez.
Let's go.
Gotta perform for this?
And I'd just like to thank you for taking time to do the interviews and communicate with players and bringing back some of my friends because it's just awesome. So I really appreciate you for doing those and doing this today.
Oh, I mean, my pleasure. This is always a great time. I've enjoyed watching your streams, and I'm excited that folks are coming back and checking out the game. We got a lot of cool stuff coming up, so I hope they stick around for that.
Yeah. So, first question, is COVID still having an impact on LOTRO's development?
That's that's a tough one for me to answer, in part because I've only been here for a few months, so the only times that I've seen it are in COVID times. Um, my general sense, though, is yes. I think that the studio in general has done a pretty solid job of transitioning to a fully remote setup. Um, but there's definitely difficulties that come with that. One of the things is it's harder to integrate new people into stuff that they haven't experienced before remotely. It still takes a lot more work. It takes a lot more time. It's not impossible by any stretch, but it does have an effect. And it's not to say that that stuff wouldn't be possible without COVID, but certainly because COVID has forced us into the situation, that aspect is having an impact certainly. And obviously, as people get vaccinated, sometimes they have to take off some time. Um, there are issues like that that have come up, and like that's great. Like we're happy that folks are getting vaccinated, but that does have some impact. So, I don't think it's nearly as big of an issue as it probably was last year, based on what I've seen and heard. But it's certainly going to continue to have some impact on us as long as it's happening. We also exist in this world and we have to keep up with it, and just the way it impacts all of y'all, it impacts us as well.
So, I noticed that you're not in the office today, so I assume you're all working from home right now?
Yeah, yeah, we have not been in the office. I mean, I've been in the office a handful of times since I started. Up until that point, uh, I don't think that they had really done any stuff at the office. We did briefly reopen the office for folks to be able to optionally go. It didn't have a huge uptake initially. It's sort of unfortunately timed around the same time that Delta has become a bigger concern. So folks have, out of an abundance of caution, have been trying to stay home and keep themselves protected, and their families as well. So yeah, I've been working from home pretty much the entire time that I've been working with Standing Stone.
Okay, good deal. So, going on to monetization, in previous interviews, you've talked a lot about monetization. It seems to be a pet project of yours. Have any of your monetization plans solidified, or are you still thinking through potential changes?
I think that the things that have solidified are sort of where the best focuses of our time are. But I wouldn't say that the plans themselves have really solidified into something cohesive. I think that the conversations are going to be, like I think I mentioned this on the forums, but over the next few weeks, I think that we're going to get a little firmer into what we're trying to do. I still have to put together that pitch for leadership to get broad approval, and also have to make sure that I shop that around internally to the teams to make sure that folks have an opportunity to chime in. Um, but I think that is coming along really nicely. It's still not something that we're going to be targeting imminently, certainly for this year. Um, but it's hopefully something that we'll be able to tackle more next year. And it's something that'll be, absolutely going to be a work in progress. I don't think it's going to be a case where, we flip a switch and everything is magically better. There's going to be pieces that are going to be coming in. There's going to be things that we're going to learn as we go along, and we're going to continue to work with it over time.
Sure. All right. Let's see. When LOTRO went free to play, it was praised as having one of the best free to play models of any MMO. Um, it's now 11 years later. How are you planning to adapt to the current market?
I mean, I think that the first way to adapt to the market is understand what the market looks like. We play lots of games. We play free-to-play games. We play premium games. We want to look at what are our competitors doing in the MMO space, but also not in the MMO space. I mean, we can debate about whether Destiny 2 counts as an MMO or not, but we can certainly agree that it has similarities to the kind of stuff that we're doing. Um, and we want to look at games, that are popular like that, and understand, okay, what is it about them that makes them popular? Um, Obviously, we're not going to turn LOTRO into a first-person shooter, but we can understand what those aspects are that are popular, and we can look to identify why they're popular and see, okay, what are those aspects that we can bring into LOTRO to make sure that it makes sense? Destiny 2 has some similar monetization to us, but some of it is different. They do have big DLCs, sort of like how we have our big expansions, but they don't tend to charge as much or at all for their smaller things. So they've gone back and forth on that at times. And obviously, they have lots of other monetization hooks in various places that they look at. And from our perspective, we need to look at games like that and say, okay, what can we learn from them? Obviously, Destiny 2 is not the only one. We look at our fellow games in the Daybreak stable, as well as other MMOs like Elder Scrolls and Final Fantasy 14. But even beyond that, looking at stuff like Call of Duty or Fortnite, just understanding what is the market today, because we shouldn't be just defined solely in terms of what does the MMO market look like, because our players aren't just exclusively MMO players. Our players play lots of other games, and we can benefit from having that broader perspective.
Sure. Yeah, it feels like Lotro's been kind of just like stuck in the same monetization model and hasn't really been adapting. So I'm glad to hear that you're looking at that. That's really cool.
Yeah, I think that was an aspect of, like, early on it was very successful, and then as things changed in terms of the priorities of Turbine and then Warner Brothers, um, it was difficult to make that transition. There's a lot of work that was done at the time that LOTRO transitioned to free to play that was probably a bit more baked in than probably was the right approach. But it made sense at the time because they were just trying to make sure things were working in the short term, and they weren't worried as much about what are things going to look like 10 years from now. And part of the thing that I'm hoping to help the team with is transitioning from a mindset of thinking about the next 6 months, the next year to, well, sorry,
Hey, that's
he's
fine.
very anxious about that too. Not just the next 6 months, the next year, but the next 5 years, the next 10 years, right? We want this game to be around for a long time, and part of that is how do we think about this game in terms of a long-term horizon. Some of that is it's going to be true that we're going to have to think about some short-term things, but uh, we don't want to let some of those short-term things get in the way of some of those long-term things, because that's not a recipe for long-term success most more often than not. And we see some of those aspects in LOTRO today.
So chat's freaking out about your dog, by the way. They're
That's
they're
totally
really
fair.
big friends.
I mean, he's adorable. He's just sometimes he's very loud, and I think it's probably mail time right now, so it's
Oh,
the
okay.
devil
Well,
coming to visit him.
when Lotro, in Lotro's favorite zone polls that players run, the Lonelands is usually near the bottom. Have you thought about giving players an additional free zone so they're not left with the Lonelands as their last taste of free to play?
I wasn't aware about the Lone specifically. That's actually I'm wrapping up my questing in Lone Lands right now. I've been going through that zone, so that makes me interested to see what the future holds, because I haven't experienced too many other zones yet. Um, so generally speaking, yeah, we absolutely are looking to see where are places that we can expand, give players opportunities to level in different ways. I mean, you saw that earlier this year with Wildwood, which we were pretty happy with. We definitely are looking to see, where are other opportunities like that to introduce Wildwood type stuff. Um, we don't have any specific plans right now for what those would be or what those would look like, but that is a conversation that we're having as we're starting to think about the post Gundabad era. Gundabad is definitely the biggest thing that we're focusing on right now, and a lot of our attention's there. But we
Sure.
want to make sure that we are, like I said, thinking a little bit more long term, and thinking about, okay, what does that future have? Um, so I think that we definitely want to make sure that we're giving players opportunities, and that might be one of the level ranges that we look at. I mean, one of the things I'd be curious about there, and maybe this is something I can turn this back on you for a second, is the issue you think from players' perspective that the Lone Lands is just not a good zone, or it's just that there's a lot of other good zones and it's just the weakest of them?
I think it depends on the player because there are players that do actually really like the Lone Lands.
Sure.
Um, for me personally, it's like the first half of the Lone Lands. The second half is a lot of fun because you get to deal with like the Red Maid and
Mm,
Radagast and all that kind of stuff. But
okay.
the first half is like, very barren and Lone Lands like lore accurate, but maybe not the best quest design where you're having to go back and forth a bunch of times to the same spots.
Sure, yeah. I mean, getting back and forth to the Forsaken Inn is a bit of a pain, since that's the only stable master until you get to Oscaroth, and then the Egglane stuff at the bottom. Is it Egglane or Elgane? I can never remember.
I think you said it
Um,
right the first time.
okay, thank you. But yeah, that stuff is definitely a little bit out of the ways. So I can understand that. I think that there's opportunities, for us as well to look at stuff like that in the future and see, that's a pretty old zone, right? That goes back to the very beginning of the game, and I can't imagine that there's been a ton of work that we've done toward, excuse me, that we've done with it in the time being. So it's possible that it's just not up to our modern standards anymore, and that's totally a reasonable thing. We know that there's other aspects of the game that have that problem. So that's something that we can look at in the future as well and say, okay, what is the work that we can do to bring this up to more modern standards? It's definitely not something that's in our near term. It's something that I would like to see, maybe within the next 5 years, but definitely it's a lower priority for us right now. There's a lot of other things competing for our time and attention, even in the next few years.
Sure. Has the cancellation of the Amazon MMO had a funding or development impact on Lotro?
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, personally speaking, I think that it's a sad thing whenever a game gets canceled for business reasons. As far we don't obviously know a ton about what Amazon was working on specifically, or how far along it was, but I feel for the developers who are working on something, and unfortunately weren't able to complete it because of considerations that were entirely outside of their control. We've all in development, everyone's worked on a game that doesn't go well, right? Whether that's because it's just not fun or it's not going well or something else. And many of us have worked on games that have been canceled. I certainly have my fair share. Um, and so it sucks to be in that position. And I definitely feel for a lot of those folks, and hope that things worked out for them. But from our perspective, I think I think it would have been interesting to see a different take on Middle Earth and the Lord of the Rings saga, um, and in MMO form. And I do think that in some ways we're worse off that Amazon wasn't able or willing to do that. I don't know obviously all the details with them and Tencent and what happened. Um, Hopefully it's something that they're able to figure out for the future, or someone else is. I don't think that we should be able to succeed as just the only Lord of the Rings MMO. I think it's totally fine that there are other games exist in the future with that. Obviously, I'm not the licensor and I don't speak for them. But from my personal perspective, I would love to see other takes, because we could absolutely learn to see, what someone looking at it with fresh eyes can bring.
Sure, cool. Uh, are you still planning the graphics updates that were announced by other people but not necessarily you guys?
Yes, we are still planning them. It's definitely something that we're still aware of and we're still thinking about. But I think I mentioned this elsewhere, and I apologize that I can't remember specifically where I said this, but it's not the kind of thing where we're going to work on all this graphic stuff and then we're going to wait to release it sometime in the future, right? It's going to be a rolling process where we're going to focus on aspects and we're going to improve them over time. I mean, I think if you look at the more modern things that we've released, like Blood of Azog and Wildwood, the graphical quality is much higher and much closer to what we would expect things to be than obviously stuff going back to SOA. And with
So,
Gundabad, sorry, go ahead.
do you think once all those changes are done, it'll be very noticeable?
That's a good question. I think that once all those changes are done and you compare it against what the game looked like at launch, it will be incredibly noticeable.
Wow.
But I think it's also going to be one of those things that as we go along, some of those pieces will also start to age over time, because it is a pretty big project. It is pretty massive. And we've done some aspects of that in the past with like pixel point lighting and stuff like that. That you've seen the improvements there on a more broader fashion. But that definitely means that like some aspects of the game you go back and you're like, wow, this clearly was not made with this feature in mind because it does not look as good as everything else. So even as we improve our graphics in that way, it's going to mean that some other aspects of the game don't shine as bright as they used to.
Are you watching and learning from other MMOs like Final Fantasy?
Oh my God, yes. Yeah. Yeah, of course we do. Like we have to, right? Whenever a game is successful, we absolutely want to spend some of our time understanding why, right? Especially if the game is not something that like you personally as a player really enjoy. And I can say personally, like I've played Final Fantasy a couple times. It's never quite stuck for me. It's just never really grabbed me too much. It seems totally fine. My wife loves it, but I could get into it. Um, and so when it's stuff like that, I really want to understand. Okay, clearly this is grabbing a lot of people. A lot of people are really into this. What is it that I'm missing here? What is this the thing that they've innovated on or iterated on, excuse me, that have brought all this attention and interest to it. And I think that they've done a lot of really smart things. Obviously, I remember the pre-Realm Reborn days, and that game was very different. And they really turned that game around in an absolutely brilliant way. And so we have to look at stuff like that and try and understand what are they doing that we're not. What are they doing better than us, and where can we look to improve? I mean, that's the same similar reason that like I would be excited about an Amazon Lord of the Rings MMO is looking at them and saying, okay, they're going to be interpreting some stuff better than us, and we're going to be interpreting some stuff better than them. Where can we learn from them so that we can improve our game? We all do that in the industry. We all look at each other's stuff and we all try and get better at it.
That's awesome. Do you think that you've helped move to a more adaptable to the industry culture?
I'm not sure what you're asking.
Do you think that the LOTRO team is maybe looking at changing things more based on other MMOs with your leadership, or do you think it's basically the same?
That's a good question. I think there's aspects that I've brought that weren't there obviously before, but I don't think it's certain. I certainly wouldn't say that I'm the only reason that stuff is happening. I think that in general the team was excited for change, and some like different groups of people were excited for different kinds of change. Obviously, there were some folks that I talked with about certain things that were like, "Hey, this is really interesting. I really want to get into this." Versus some of them were like, you do whatever you want to do, and some folks were like, no, you can't change this. This is the thing that I love. And so you got to work with all of that. I think what I have done is that I have focused on things that I have been personally interested in, whether as a player or from the production side, and focused our attention more on those things. Um, and so the folks that are been interested in those changes, they are getting the benefit of me being able to help focus the team around those conversations. But I certainly don't think that like uh, I'm bringing things that no one else thought of before to this team. I think it's a lot of just my presence is helping open some of those conversations where before people either didn't realize that that was a conversation that they could have or wanted to have.
Cool. So Soft Snake in chat asks, are you going to keep Ember's system for gear? Are you going to keep that for many years now, or are you planning any changes there?
We discussed Embers. I'm still wrapping my head around that whole system, and we're at the point right now where most of our discussions are more high level than focusing on a particular piece like that. Um, I think that we probably will end up making changes in the coming years. I don't know. I don't think that they'll be super significant. Like, I don't think that we're going to completely get rid of Embers, but that's me speculating. I suspect that once we have a bit more conversation around, agreeing in terms of what are our priorities and what are our philosophies around the monetization changes that we're planning to make, that we'll have a better understanding then of, how we're going to be changing that system, if we're going to be changing that system, what that change looks like, how significant or minor is it.
Sure. So moving on to legendary items. In previous interviews, you've stated that you're hoping to reduce LI grind with a revamped system. And I think a lot of players are for that, obviously. But I don't think we understand how grind will be reduced and what's actually changing in the revamped system. Could you explain what's actually changing?
So I can't go too deep into this. this is something that we're hoping to talk about more in the coming weeks and months. Um, what I can say is that part of the change is a shift in philosophy in terms of what is the purpose of an LI. We want LIs to be more like the way I think that players think about them, as this really cool legendary artifact kind of thing that they are carrying around with them, that grows with them, that improves with them, but still allows them to make decisions about how they want to play the game. Whereas, if you want to focus on a particular aspects, you can focus on those particular aspects. And it's looking at the current model and saying, um, not only how can we move more towards that, but where are some of the places where there has been frustration or difficulty around that grind, um, and basically just categorically simplifying it. Like I don't have a very explicit thing that I can say for you on that right now, but like the system is much more straightforward. It's been in Palantir now. It's still in development certainly, but it's been Palantir now for a few weeks, and we've been getting good feedback on it. And universally, the feedback seems to be that this is a much more straightforward system. It's much simpler. It's much easier to understand. It's much easier to interact with. There's definitely still concern in terms of like, okay, what's going to look like at cap, and what is it going to look like with all the stuff that's filled in, because it's not all finished. Um, but the early feedback has been promising, and it's been helping us as we've continued iterating on what we've done and introducing the new pieces that we haven't gotten to yet.
So, can you talk about how progression will work in the system? Like, I know you were talking earlier in a previous interview how you wanted players to actually just play the game. Um, can you talk about like how progression will work?
Sure. So one aspect I can mention is that it's more about your level. Is going to matter more than it currently does. Um, so more of your progression will be tied into just, like I said, playing the game and leveling up. And as you're leveling up, getting new things that you can put into your legendary item, and giving you the ability to improve your legendary item just by leveling up. There's additional pieces in there that I can't speak to, but they're much simpler than the current implementation. So you'll unfortunately have to take my word for that for now.
Okay.
Um, the other aspect of it is the way that you're able to get stuff is going to be much to slot into your legendary item is going to be much simpler. Um, so while at cap you're probably going to be farming particular areas if you want a particular thing to slot in there. Uh, Along the way as you're leveling, it's gonna be much easier to find stuff, and you're gonna have a much easier time to get rid of stuff that isn't useful to you to pick up stuff that is. Um, the system for that is still sort of in development, and some of that is tied to the reward track battle pass like system that I mentioned before. Um, but that's still in development, so we're still figuring that piece out.
So, is it going to be closer to like a trait tree or a slot type system,
I think it's
or
closer
both?
to a slot type system. I don't. I think there's going to be some trait tree elements, but they're definitely calling them trees is probably really giving everyone the wrong mental image. I would think of it as um, like traits that grow with you, divorced from a tree entirely.
Okay.
Maybe closer to the virtues in some respects, but yeah, that's definitely it's closer, but it's still not quite right.
How does monetization work in the new system?
Uh, So I can't talk about that unfortunately, but I can
Okay.
say that it's the hooks are definitely less intense than they were in, or they are rather, in the current system.
So let's say there's a player that's put a ton of time into their current LIs. Um, will they still see all that time in the new system, or how is the transition going to work?
That's a great question, and it's been a big debate. Um, there's two schools of thought on that. There's the one school of thought that says players spend a lot of time on this, a lot of valuable time, and we want to make sure that we're rewarding them for that time that they're spending, so that when they are starting day one with the new system, they'll have the opportunity to start a little further ahead. And depending on how much time they spent, they spend a little further ahead there. And what that further ahead means, what a percentage that looks like, that's definitely up for debate as well. The other school of thought is this is a bit of a clean break, right? We're simplifying things, we're changing things, and there's an opportunity there to sort of get everyone back on an equal footing. Um, I I understand that approach. I suspect that ultimately we will go with the former rather than the latter, but it's still a conversation that we're having. Um, we definitely want to be cognizant of what the player impact for this stuff is going to be. But we understand that it's going to be, it's been 80 levels of working with two legendary item systems, and now you have a third one. And so for folks that have really been engaged with this for a long time, we definitely don't want them to feel like uh, we don't want them to have a bad experience, frankly. And at the same time, we want to be mindful that, if I'm a new player coming in, or I'm getting close to getting a legendary item, or I've just started that, um, it can feel a little overwhelming or intimidating to uh, have to see like, oh, players who just started on day one already have this thing finished. So we're still sort of trying to work within those two camps and figure out a solution. Um, I'm tilting a little bit more towards giving folks some amount of compensation in the new system so that they can start their new allies a little bit easier, a little bit faster. Um, but that is, like I said, that is a debate that is ongoing right now.
So Ponton in chat asks, will this new legendary item system start at 50 or is it higher level?
I believe the answer is 50. My understanding is where the goal is to replace the two current ally systems that work sort of in sequence, pre-imbued and imbued. With this new system. And so initially, when we release this stuff, you will have the opportunity to keep playing with your current allies. We're not taking them away from you, but we will phase them out eventually. We haven't settled on when that will be exactly, but we want to give players the opportunity to sort of get that switch over, get the opportunity to try stuff out before necessarily having to commit completely. But the mechanics of that are still up for debate, and we haven't nailed it down. So like one of the things that I've seen discussed is, okay, you treat your current ally like a token, and you turn that in, and you get a token out of it that gives you some amount of XP or whatever. So in that case, that would be, you would have less of an opportunity to try the thing because you'd have to commit more. But what I'm talking about is in the sense of, we wouldn't necessarily say, okay, your items are junk when the LI stuff comes out. You still have the opportunity to keep playing with them, and then when you're ready to switch over, you can switch over. That's the current thinking, but we're still trying to figure that out. There's a fun question to be answered there about like, okay, what happens if I haven't played for 3 years and then I come back 1 year from now, and the switchover has happened and my item is now junk? How do we treat that? So we're still working our way through cases.
So when the new system releases, a player at cap will be able to try out a new LI without having to move their current LI over?
That is possible, but we have not settled on that yet. Like I said, one of the other options is that you trade in your ally like it's a token into a barter vendor, and you get out, like an XP chit or something that you can then put into, improving your new ally that you're going to get. But that's still something that we're figuring out. There's, like I said, there's a couple different approaches there, and we're looking at which approach we think makes the most sense.
Hmm. So you've already answered this before, but I'm going to ask again just to make sure that it's still the case and that I heard correctly. Are first, second, and third agers going away?
Yes, that is my understanding. First, that there's not going to be a distinction between rarities of legendary items. It's just going to be a much simpler thing. You have this legendary item. Um, I don't know specifically how stats will be affected between like weapon types or something like that. I don't remember off the top of my head. But there's the concept of rarity, I believe, is going away. Um, and there's a related thing to this that I totally spaced on. Um, no, lost it. Sorry.
Well, if you remember, feel free to stop me and we'll circle back.
Will do.
Um, will the new system be an upgrade to allies maxed in the current system?
Uh, in the sense that will it perform at a higher level than
Yeah.
previous ones? I imagine some of them will be and some of them won't be. As we're migrating the system over, I have no doubt in my mind that when we first introduce this, that it will not be a flat increase for everybody. Um, we're going to continue to work on it. The expectation isn't that we're going to, introduce a new system and then walk away and then never speak of it again for a decade. The goal is that this is something we're going to continue to support and iterate on after we introduce it and after new stuff comes out. Um, so it'll continue to get tweaked. We'll continue to tweak different pieces of it and how it interacts with, classes, their abilities, other aspects of the game like raids, dungeons, etc.
There's a lot of players in chat asking the same basic question, which is, should I continue to work on my current LI?
That's a great question. So the, the easy answer is yes, because it still has benefits for you in the game right now, and those benefits aren't going away immediately. Um, the question of will this mean that is that time that you lose in the sense of it's going to hurt your new LI? I mean, the system doesn't exist yet from your perspective, right? It's coming down the pike, but you're still playing the game today. There's still value in improving your allies. There's still value in getting that little bit of extra DPS or healing or whatever, so that you can continue doing the content that you're enjoying already. Um, what it'll look like once the system comes out, that I can't speak to you about yet because I don't have a good answer for you. Um, but I wouldn't say that you should try and stock up everything because, maybe the day it comes out, everything will be magically better. Because that's probably not gonna make you feel better one way or the other. Through that path lies disappointment, I think, regardless. Right? Play the game, enjoy it. Uh, if what you enjoy is like building up a bunch of crystals and stuff and using them, like use your scrolls as empowerment, right? They're still gonna have as much value in your allies they're gonna have not in your ally. That I feel really reasonably confident about. Um, what they look like in the new system, that's still up for debate.
So on that, I know some players have been like hoarding scrolls of empowerment for their new characters and stuff like that. Will that still be useful in some way if they have like a ton of them just sitting in their vault? Or
Yeah, those are like the edge cases I was talking about where we're still sort of trying to figure out what that long term is going to look like. The answer is I don't know right now. Um, and I don't know that we seriously have a conversation, but sorry, that we seriously had a conversation about it at this point because the reality is right now that like if you are saving it for some future character that may or may not benefit from this thing, I would generally always advise people to, sort of seize the day and enjoy the stuff that they can right now. Because by the time that that character exists and you're actually playing them, like things could be wildly different and you might not be as interested in having those scrolls anymore. Um, it's like if it's one thing if it's like, hey, like I have a character at 50 and I can start dumping them into the LI right now versus, this is a character that I have in my head and maybe it'll exist soon.
so Chromite in chat asks, are you going to fix the attack speed difference between the different weapon types? I guess currently it's bugged between like daggers and swords and things like that.
I don't believe that this work is included in that. I don't think that that's not something I've heard as part of this conversation. So I think that we're probably going to tackle that in a future thing if we want to.
Cool. Well, I need to talk to an LI NPC in the new system.
There will probably be some kind of NPC. Yeah. Um, I don't know exactly how many or what kind. But there will probably be some kind of NPC that you're going to want to check in with periodically. I expect that if that's the case, it'll mostly be like at as you're leveling, probably less once you're at cap. Um, but maybe like whenever we introduce, new content or, new eye level bumps or whatever, that stuff would be relevant again.
The reason I asked that is because when character changes happened over to trait trees, bards who used to give us skills and things got left in the dust. We no longer talk to bard NPCs at all
Oh, I think
because
it's
they
very
have
funny that you have
no use.
the trainers and they're just
Yeah,
there, just hanging
they're
out.
just hanging out.
Yeah.
They're not doing anything now.
Yeah. I don't know specifically how we're going to be transitioning some of the current LI folks like that. It's possible that we'll reuse some of them, and some of them will just sort of become useless. Um, it's more important for us that we make sure that the new stuff works the way that we want to, but at the same time, we have to be mindful that because we're going to support all of the allies at the same time for a little while. It's not like we can just say, all right, we're going to get rid of the old people, because folks that want to continue using the old allies are going to need the opportunity to continue engaging with them.
Will the new system have legacies, relics, and titles?
It'll have something similar. We're going to introduce new verbiage for that, but it's going to be fairly familiar to folks who are familiar with those things.
Cool.
I like the way that we actually are theming the new allies. I think it's a really clever approach. It wasn't my idea, so I don't have to take credit for it at all. But I thought it was quite clever, and I think it ties things in a lot better than what the way the current allies are, where relics and titles and stuff feel a little stapled on, I guess.
So, since you're getting rid of first, second, and third agers, how is crafting going to work with the ally system?
That is an excellent question, and I can't tell you. But
Okay.
the thing that I can say is yes, we are aware that that is something that people are going to be upset about. We actually think that crafters will be reasonably happy in terms of how things have gone. I think it'll be generally a win in terms of how that works. As far as I know, it's not like I don't know that we're necessarily going to get rid of the ability to craft those old things, just because again they're still going to be useful during the transition period. But I'm not sure exactly how we are going to transition those away. I don't think we're going to want to like lose the appearances necessarily. Um, but certainly those might become essentially cosmetic items. So it's not like they're going to go away completely in some fashion.
So, Druid's Fire in chat asks if Valar character boost levels will be reworked to accommodate the new legendary items system.
Yeah, I think that that's something that we're planning to do. I'm not super familiar with all the Valar stuff, but I know we've talked about that for future Valars, that we want to make sure that we're giving players the thing that we want them to be playing with, as opposed to a system that we're planning to move away from. So there will be something, but the exact form that it'll take, I unfortunately don't know.
So, moving on to Gundabad. I feel like we know very little about Gundabad.
I mean, it's a mountain. What more do you need to know?
It is a mountain. I had somebody in chat the other day that was like, they've never seen LOTRO before, but they knew enough Lord of the Rings lore to know what Gundabad was. And I'm like, wow,
Wow.
you know your stuff. All right, you should be playing LOTRO. And they're like, yeah, I really should. And so they
Yeah.
downloaded it.
That's a very specific like Venn diagram of like I know enough to know what Mount Gundabad is, but not enough to actually play Lotro. Like that's a
Or
very
even
weird.
heard about LOTRO. Like
Yeah,
that's a crazy Venn diagram.
that's wild.
So could you talk about something we haven't heard yet?
Can I talk about something you haven't heard yet? What can I say that won't get me in trouble?
I feel like Cordovan just perked up. He's like, I'm ready to just punch him. I'm ready.
He has a big button that he can press at any moment that'll like plop me out of the seat like an ejector, in case I say anything. Okay, I'll give you a tease. Some of the coolest elements that I've seen in the new expansion, in terms of the appearance, uh, have a really excellent crystal element to them, and it ties into other stuff. But that's what I can say without getting into trouble. A little bit of new information here for you, nice little exclusive for you, Andang.
Okay. Okay. Um, so there have been a lot of people looking at when certain items in the game say that they expire,
Hmm.
and a lot of them are 134, and so that caused a lot of players to think that the new expansion will be a 5 level instead of a 10 level. Can you say if it's a 5 or 10 level?
I'm not sure if I'm able to. There is an answer to this question. I just don't know if I'm allowed to say it. Um, that's something we're gonna have to keep an eye on, and hopefully we'll be able to speak about more in the next few weeks and months.
And will it be a standard 5 zone expansion?
Okay, so this is where I'm gonna have to apologize because uh, I don't know how to answer the question, and it's not because you're being unclear. It's because the terminology that I've been instructed in internally is a little confusing. One of the things I've learned is that we try not to use the word zones. We try and use the word areas. But I'm not entirely sure how that converts in terms of what we traditionally think of as zones, right? We talked about the Lonelands earlier. Lonelands is something that I would traditionally think of as a zone, and I would assume
Right.
it fits into an area in this. Um, my sense is that uh, in terms of I think the spirit of your question, in terms of the size of Gundabad, is that Gundabad is bigger than we've traditionally done expansions. How much bigger? I don't have a
Wow.
good way to say. I don't think we're talking about twice the size or anything like that. It's not a dramatic difference, I don't think, but I think it's a little bit bigger than what we've used to. Certainly, the stuff that I've seen is huge. And I actually was able to get a nice walkthrough of the environs of Mount Gundabad not that long ago, and I have another one scheduled for later this afternoon, so I'm excited to see the progress.
Is it mostly underground?
Um, it's not entirely underground. I don't know if I'd say mostly or not. I don't know. Probably, but like not like dramatically so.
Okay. Um, so back to the zone thing real quick. With Minas Morgul, you guys said that it was like two regions or something like that, and a lot of players got upset because they thought it just meant two zones, and so it confused a lot of players until it actually came out and we realized it was basically the same size expansion as a normal expansion. So I
Yeah, I don't think
think,
folks will be disappointed by the size. I don't think that
yeah.
anyone, once they see it, certainly we've had players in Palantir who have been interacting with it, and no one has complained that it's too small. We've gotten the opposite complaint. Well, not I wouldn't call it a complaint, but gentle joking on that, that it's pretty big. So I think that anyone who's worried about, oh, is Gundabad going to have enough cool stuff? Like Gundabad has a lot of cool stuff. I'm really, really excited to see some of the stuff under the mountain looks just phenomenal. And it's nothing to take away from the regions that are above ground, but just some of those underground areas are just wild in terms of what the team has done. I'm really impressed.
So Canwick asks, "Is this Moria 2.0?"
Um, I guess in some ways, right? Like we definitely learned from Moria when making this. I wouldn't say that it's 2.0 in the sense of like I don't know that they're directly comparable. Obviously they're both made by dwarves. They're both under a mountain. They both have that same dwarf aesthetic. Um, but I don't think that they're like I don't think that you're gonna look at Gundabad and say, oh, this looks exactly like Moria. I think that Gundabad has enough stuff that it will be recognizable and stand well on its own.
So is the LI system still coming out before Gundabad?
That's the plan.
Okay. Do you have a timetable for the LI system?
I've been vaguely saying weeks and months, so I'm gonna stick with that.
Okay.
I would love to give you a date, but we don't have one nailed down, right? We're still trying to get everything shaped up. Once we have a date nailed down, we will definitely be announcing it. We're not holding out just for the sake of it.
Is the plan with Gundabad to continue the process of not releasing a raid at launch?
Yes. Yeah. Then that's function of time, frankly. Like we're trying to do a lot of stuff. I think we're trying to do a bit too much stuff, but what are you gonna do? We have a lot of desires that we want to accomplish, and I respect that. But that means that stuff like the raid, we want to make sure that we give it enough attention. And if we try to get it out for the Gundabad launch, we'd either have to delay it pretty dramatically, or we'd have to really, scope down the raid in ways that we're not comfortable with doing on either end. So, um, we're definitely going to be pushing that off further. The hope is still that it won't be too far, but we don't have a firm date on that either, obviously.
Will the Brawler class have weapons?
The Brawler class absolutely has weapon slots, and things will go into those weapon slots. What those things are definitely weapons, but not in the traditional way that we think of medieval weapons. Certainly,
Okay. I'm
it's
I'm
not going to be
liking
like
that.
it's not going to be like, oh, suddenly they're using like I don't know lightsabers or something, right? Like it's still going to be very much within the world of Middle Earth. Um, but it's not something that's like uh, it's not like a giant sword. They're not using giant swords. I can confirm that.
If you did bring out lightsabers, I think there would be rioting in Hobbiton. Like there
Oh
would be
yeah,
just players going
yeah,
crazy.
and that's why I want to be clear, right? It's we're not going off the reservation here, right? We still want to be really respectful of the world, but at the same time, like this is not something that you have seen us do a ton of, and so it's going to be a little bit different, but not wildly so. We think players will really like it, of course. You know, I've had the opportunity to see stuff as it's coming in, and I got a walkthrough of what Brawler stuff looks like. I think it was late last week or the week before, and it looks really sweet. I think I'm excited. I know that there will be some players who are going to be disappointed because some players just don't think that it fits, and I respect that. I respect that that's their opinion, but we disagree, and working with folks on our end on the licensing side, and they disagree as well. So we think that this will be great for folks in general.
Do you think being a Boston area studio has impacted the development of the Brawler class?
Not as much as it should have, honestly. There were some talks about that early on, but we I think wisely steered away from that to keep it within the world of Middle Earth. But it would be, God, it would have been excellent. Like if I could justify creating like a Boston Brawler pack, sorry, a Boston Brawler pack, then we absolutely should. I just don't think I'll ever be able to get that approved.
Above Manway asks a good question. Which Lord of the Rings character will the Brawler class be based off of? Because every class we've had so far has been based on a Lord of the Rings character.
I think the one that we've focused on the most has been Helm Hammerhand. I
Oh,
mean,
nice.
obviously, Hammerhand. He has that name for a reason, and he's, I mean, a bit of a badass, known for Helm's Deep, pretty pivotal location in the story of Lord of the Rings. Um, so we focused on him and the stuff that he's done. I'm not the lore expert in this game, however, which is good reason. It's for good reason. I'm still reading Two Towers. The folks that know that stuff better than me have put together a nice little dossier when we started working on the class. So when I joined in, I got a chance to read it, and it walked through, what are the references, what are the inspirations, and Helm Hammerhand was definitely the biggest one.
What system are you bringing back for the expansion?
Well, now that would be telling. Like, come on, I can't do that.
It would be telling. It'd be great. It'd be great to be telling.
No, I mean like I said before, it's something that we've done in the past. I think it's something that we're also going to look at extending not just for Gundabad and future expansions, but also, what are other ways that we can use it in terms of future updates. I'm excited to see it come back. It's not the biggest thing in the game, certainly. I don't think it's anything that people are going to look at and say, oh, this was a definitive aspect of LOTRO that went away. Um, I think it's definitely on the small to medium side, I would say.
Hmm.
Um, but it's something that we feel has a lot of potential, not just in this expansion, but moving forward as well.
Is there anything for new players in the expansion?
If you're talking about if you're a brand new player starting at level 1, the answer is, I mean, not really. I think I guess technically with the exception of Brawler, which is connected to it. Brawler, by definition, if you're going to buy that, you're going to have the opportunity to start from level 1, and if that's your first character, then Godspeed. Um, it's pretty fun to play. I'm a pretty casual Lotro player, all things considered. I haven't gotten my way to cap yet, but I've had the opportunity to check it out, and it's coming along nicely. Um, I think the other thing is we're continuing with missions. So, once you get to level 20, you'll have the opportunity to try out some Gundabad missions. I also got a demo of those about a month ago, I want to say, maybe a little bit longer. There's some really clever ones in there. We're really playing with the form a little bit now. I think that there's definitely going to be some that players are going to be more used to based on what we did in Blood of Azog, Wildwood, and War of Three Peaks. But there's a handful that we are trying to sort of experiment and see, okay, what are the bounds that we can push on this, how players react to it. And so I'm really interested to see, how players feel about that stuff. I really hope they like it because I'd love to do more of the missions that are a bit more experimental. Um, but we'll have to see.
So, are you doing less missions with this expansion to maybe increase their quality?
Yeah, that's part of the goal here is that we're
Good.
devoting a little bit more time. I don't think it's going to be like War of Three Peaks, I don't remember the number specifically off the top of my head, but I suspect it'll be a fewer. But yeah, we hope that everyone reacts the same way that you just did.
Everyone asked an interesting question that I hadn't even remembered as a thing. Will Warsteed allies be included in the revamp?
That's a good question. I'm not sure. I'm not super familiar with War Seed allies. I'd have to ask the team working on the ally stuff. They'll definitely know better than I would. I will see if I can get an answer from them, and if I'm able to share it, I will pass it along to you.
Cool.
Let me make that note before I forget.
So, mini expansions. Are you guys still planning to do more?
Yes. But I don't think that they'll be. I don't think that we're looking as War of Three Peaks as the precedent setter for mini expansions. From our perspective, the value of mini expansions are that we get to do something that is big but not huge. Um, Whenever we try and do something that's huge, right, that's going to take more time, that's going to take more resources, and doing something a little bit smaller and more contained lets us sort of experiment within the form a little bit of an expansion, and we think that we can do that in a way that players will like better. Part of what happened with War of Three Peaks was that it wasn't. Uh, we sort of didn't always know what we were making with that, and it came together a little bit hotter than we wanted it to. I wasn't there, so I don't know the full story, but that's just the broader stuff. Um, the goal looking forward, and one of the things I had a conversation around, and I think I mentioned this in one of the interviews I did. I apologize if it was to Louis and Bloodborne to see which one of them I mentioned this to, but when I made my request to the team to sort of pitch me, what do the next X years of Lotro look like, and they gave me a ton of material to work with. One of the things I wanted them to keep in mind is we want to make sure that we're mindful of mini expansions as well, and we're not just saying, okay, we need to do expansions and that's it. And they, I think, actually within those limitations develop some really awesome stuff that I'm not sure that we would have been able to without mini expansions. So our hope is that we're going to have the opportunity to do a better one next time, and uh, it'll delight players a lot more than the last one did, than the first one did, I should say.
Are you rethinking monetization with mini expansions?
Um, I mean, we're rethinking monetization broadly, so I would be shocked if that didn't come up. It hasn't been like a huge focus of the conversation right now, just because it's not as imminent of a thing, right? It's not something that happens all the time. It's not something that happens every year. But it's something definitely we'll have a conversation around once we start working on it.
Are you still considering, if you have a VIP, maybe getting a discount or free expansions?
I think Cord mentioned something around that, and I definitely agree with what he said, right? That's something we're looking into. I know it's DDO, they ran a VIP discount. We certainly would love to do that if we're able to, but some of that is creating, excuse me, the technical back end to make sure that we have the opportunity to do so. But yeah, as we're rethinking our broader monetization stuff like that is definitely a big piece of it.
Okay, we're to quick random questions. So
Okay.
here we go. Um, are we getting an update to the instance finder to find groups again?
I would absolutely love to do that. I just don't think it's going to happen in the next year. I just don't think we'll have the time.
Bloodborne asked this. In 2019, the producer's letter teased some kin updates we never received. Are you planning to do kin updates?
Uh, Kin updates is something that we're still looking at for 2022. We don't have a firm plan on that yet, but if it's something that's going to happen, it's probably going to be latter half of 2022. We'll definitely have more to say in the producer's letter for next year.
So Lotro used to have, I'd say, a lot more things that you could trade amongst players. Why are there so many bound to account and level cutoff items now?
That's a good question. I don't know specifically. We're just speculating. I imagine it has something to do with wanting to make sure that we're controlling, against spam and gold selling and other stuff like that. We want to avoid giving players incentives to do stuff like that. Um, but specifically, I don't have a good answer. I don't know the answer to that, unfortunately. Um, but I definitely, I should ask.
So Lotro has a lot of non-gamers, where Lotro is the only game they play. Um, and they don't identify as such necessarily. How often do you consider solo players and like new to gaming players?
All the time. I mean, I think that frankly, like those tend to be disproportionately the biggest player groups, even if they're often the quietest ones, especially in MMOs. We definitely want to make sure that we're considering those players. Obviously, not everything is going to be for every player, right? If you're all this LI work we're doing right now, if you're someone that likes to make alts and then level them to 50 and never engage with the LI system, it's not going to be for you. And I'm sorry, but like that doesn't mean that we shouldn't do it for all the other players that are engaging with that kind of stuff. Um, at the same time, like we definitely want to make sure that we're giving different player demographics and archetypes stuff to do in different ways. So that's why housing obviously is one of those things. Cosmetics and from festivals is one of those things. High-end content like raids and six mans and stuff like that. Those are things. Sorry, six-player instances, I should say, are different kinds of things that we create to focus on different player groups. Um, so new players, casual players, players that only play Lotro, those are definitely groups that we value, and we want to make sure that we are identifying work that we can do to improve their gaming experience as well.
Chat's been repeating this question quite a bit. Are there any plans for new musical instruments?
I'm not aware of any specific plans for new musical instruments, but frankly, I'm not actually sure who has done that work in the past, so it's possible that they are just waiting to tell me and haven't yet.
Okay. Uh, so, from a Tolkien language expert, I got asked, do you have a Tolkien language consultant?
I don't know if we have a Tolkien language consultant. Like I mentioned with the lore stuff, like we have folks who are we have a Tolkien scholar in house. We have folks who knew their Tolkien lore backwards and forwards, and those folks spend a lot of that time understanding, what's going on and making sure that we're communicating it broadly throughout the team, so that as we're working on stuff, it connects well into the lore of Lord of the Rings. Um, I don't know specifically what their process is, or if they work with outside folks like that. I'm not aware of that, but I wouldn't be shocked if I'm just not aware of it personally.
Cool. Are there plans for more inventory space or new types of inventory space like weapon or armor carryalls?
I think the carryall route is a lot easier to go down for us. Unfortunately, from my understanding, because I asked the inventory space question a little while back, the way that the game was designed up front, they assumed that there was going to be a limitation in terms of the number of inventory slots available, and so a lot of the game is built around those aspects, and making that change is incredibly cost prohibitive. It's something that we definitely are aware of, and we want to see if we can actually ever find a way around. But as of this time, we're probably going to go more down the carryall route than trying to expand the inventory itself.
Have you guys thought, so currently the way buffs work is they're fellowship wide. Have you thought about raid wide buffs?
Yeah, I was under the impression that as part of the class balance, we actually moved some buffs to that. I thought some of like the anthems that minstrels had were moved to raid wide, but maybe I'm
I
mistaken.
think you're right. I guess players were wondering about like movement speed buffs and stuff like that as well.
Oh, that specifically I can't speak to. I'd have to speak with the systems designers to understand where they're at in terms of that. I personally don't have strong feelings either way, but I frankly also haven't spent any time thinking about the topic.
I guess the reason they were asking is because they're one of the people that came back to Lotro, and they, because of your interviews, and they were wondering they're getting back into like low level grouping with a bunch of other players, and so they have like one group that goes faster than the other because it's fellowship based and not
Mm.
raid based.
Yeah, I understand that. I would definitely have to look into that to understand. That could be a question of like we just didn't think to do it, or didn't think there was value in it, or there's some deep-seated reason, technically or balance-wise, that we felt it wasn't a good idea. So that's definitely something that I don't have enough an understanding of to give you a good answer around. But I imagine it's one of those things or some combination as to why that isn't the case right now.
So Chromite asked an interesting question. So if you don't purchase the premium wallet, the item goes into your inventory and you can still like trade it and do things like that. But if you have a premium wallet, it gets basically put in the premium wallet and you can never remove it from there essentially.
Hmm.
Um, have there been thoughts about moving the premium wallet to a carry-all instead?
I think I've seen some discussions around that, but I don't believe that we've had any serious thoughts around that. Um, the premium wallet and the way that we have a bajillion currencies. And I don't love that we have a bajillion currencies. I don't think it makes for a good user experience, especially as you're leveling through and sort of just getting this time I'm getting marks, and this time I'm getting seals, and this time I'm getting whatever the hell else. Keeping up with that and figuring out the value of these different things is very tricky. Um, so I think that's something that we need to examine more. We haven't had the opportunity to really have that conversation yet, but hopefully that's something we'll be able to next year.
Cool. Have you thought about introducing more cutscenes into Lotro? We had a bunch at like the low levels and the middle levels, but then once we got to like Helm's Deep and later, we haven't had very many, if any, cutscenes recently.
Um, I don't know for sure. Coming into Gundabad when I did, I've mostly let the design team sort of go down the paths that they're already familiar with. I'm not trying to step in and sort of dictate right now, and so hopefully never. Um, but I definitely want to make sure that I understand, why we moved away from stuff like that. My suspicion would be it came down to, time and money. Cutscenes are generally pretty time consuming and expensive to make, especially if they require important assets, because those tends to be the assets that get worked on the most, right? If we're talking about like using Durin in a cutscene, Durin is a very important model, and so we want to make sure that, the version of him we're using gets polished up and is really close to being final before we put them into a cutscene. Um, and that tends to mean that a lot of time takes place and isn't always a viable approach to take. But I don't know for sure. Um, I think that we'd have to look and understand, first of all, like when we used those cutscenes in the early game, was that the best use of them? Did that make sense? And as we move forward, where are good opportunities for us to introduce stuff like that? My understanding is that there are a few that we've done post Helm's Deep, but definitely not to your point, a lot fewer than you saw initially. And some of that might just come down to, as we worked our way through the story, it just made sense.
Sure. This question keeps getting asked. Will the game have regional pricing?
Uh, we right now do not have specific plans for that. That doesn't mean that it's something we would never do, but it's not something uh, that is on the horizon as far as I'm aware in terms of, anything in the short term.
Let's see here.
I got time, I think, for like two more questions.
That's actually how many I have in my document, so we're good.
Perfect. Look at that.
Can we get better maps for complex underground areas?
Um, I mean, yeah, we should. We probably should give you them. I haven't looked at the Gundabad maps yet. And I haven't looked at. I don't recall how complicated some of those areas are. Um, it's definitely one of those things where for older stuff, it's a bit more tricky to find the time to put those together. If there are maps that folks see once Gundabad comes out or is available in Bullroar that they see areas that are confusing, definitely call those out to us because it's easier for us to make a priority of fixing those. Definitely like to go back through and improve those. It's similar to when we were talking about improving the lone lands, but it's just not as high of a priority. It's not impossible. It's just not simple to do. It's time consuming, and there's only a small number of people that can really do it.
So what about for like Gundabad, for example?
So our goal definitely is to make sure that Gundabad is easily traversable when you're using a map. Obviously, we can't help you if you don't are not good at using maps, but we want to make sure that we are giving you every advantage so that you can navigate the space relatively easily. Um, that said, like I said, some of the maps might just not be up to par because something is inaccurate, or we missed something, or we made a mistake. So if there's stuff that you're seeing that you feel like, hey, this could be better, definitely call that out to us, and it'll be something that we will take a look at. And sometimes we'll need to just find time for that. Sometimes we won't be able to find time for that immediately, and we'll have to backburner it.
Final question. What are you most excited for in Lotro's future?
Ooh, that's a good question. I think the thing that sticks out right now is I'm excited to get to the point with the team where we are all on the same page moving forward. I think just sort of naturally, the team has sort of been in a lot of different places, and as I've come in, I've tried to more align ourselves and get us all, rowing in the same direction. And I think it's gotten a little bit better, but there's certainly different places where there's still more work to do. And I think that once the team is really all pulling in the same way, we are going to be able to put out some crazy stuff. So uh, I'm hopeful that that'll be soon, but it's a work in progress.
All right. Awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time. I
Again,
feel like
thank
we got
you.
a lot out.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I hope that a few more of your friends might come back after this interview. But certainly, I appreciate you taking the time to ask questions, and for folks hopping on to ask their own stuff and listen. I've said it before, but we do this for the players, and it's super great to see stuff like this that y'all are interested in. Um, and I really appreciate y'all taking the time to do so.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
All right. Have a good one. Best of luck.
Peace. All right, chat. That was an interview with LOTRO's producer, Raninia. We learned a lot of information about LIs. We learned a little bit about the expansion, and we also talked quite a bit about monetization. So hopefully you guys really enjoyed it. A big thanks to Raninia for taking the time to do this. This is their third interview already in basically just a month. So, like, that's awesome. And players have noticed. Players have been listening to these conversations, and they've been coming back to the game. Players that haven't been here in a long time. I know several personally. Not to mention, it seems like every day in chat there's people talking about how they're coming back. So it's really cool to see this happening. Hopefully you guys really enjoyed that interview.